Hello and welcome to 10 by 9, where 9 people have up to 10 minutes each to tell a true story from their own life. I'm Paul Doran and this is the 10 by 9 podcast. It's been a wonderful week with an amazing 10 by 9 at the heart of it on the theme Troubles. Not the Troubles, just Troubles. And the audience was regaled with amazing stories, some from our recent difficult past, but not all.
When we arrived, there was a massive riot already in progress. They were fighting hand to hand and beating the bollocks out of each other. So we got stuck in, as you do.
The first mortar hit the police station. The chairs and I were thrown upwards into the air and then violently downwards, winding me instantly.
When I met him, he was 85, on his deathbed, lung cancer. What I found on that day was a piece of the puzzle, a piece that had been missing from my life since before I was born.
So get ready for 3 very different stories told on the 29th of May in the Black Box. Our first story on this podcast was also the first story of the evening and, appropriately enough, came from a first-timer. Just be warned, it does feature some graphic violence and some swearing, but it reflects the environment in which it's set. Here's Liam Kelly.
1973, I was knocked down, put into a coma for 3 months, right? And when I came out of the coma, I lost memory completely, right? So my whole life was, when I was young, was violence, right? So we headed up the waterworks that night. The waterworks was a park that had 2 ponds and was otherwise known as Queen Victoria Gardens. The ponds were full of swans and ducks, huge big white swans that shone bright in the summer days. The waterworks was always busy, parents with their children having picnics and feeding the ducks. It had 2 playgrounds and even a wee stream where you could catch tadpoles as long as you had a net on the end of a bamboo pole and a wee jam jar. The kids would have played ball and tippy tag and everything looked grand in the scale of things. But at night time, it was a different story. It was full of winos and glue sniffers, basically undesirables. They would light fires and sit round with their carryouts. After dark, the place was notorious for riots, as the top pond backed onto a Protestant estate and the sides and the bottom backed onto a Catholic estate, so fierce battles often erupted. Most people thought you'd be mad to go in there at night time, but it didn't stop us, because we were tooled to the teeth, crowbars, hurls and dog chains. Most of the times the police dared not to come in at night because it was so dangerous. There was loads of trees and bushes. Any sniper would have been in his element hiding amongst the foliage. When we arrived, there was a massive riot already in progress. They were fighting hand to hand and beating the bollocks out of each other. So we got stuck in, as you do. A few hours passed and the crowd dwindled, and then the peelers moved in to pick up the stragglers. Everybody just split like a banana. There was a guy on a bike with a pole that had 6-inch nails hammered into it. He was swinging it round his head. He managed to crack me on the forehead and then gave chase as I bolted. I managed to get to the big steep hill that separated the 2 ponds. The guy now had the pole fixed to the front of his bike like a spiky battering ram. He came flying down the hill towards me, and I looked about the ground frantically for something to lift in order to defend myself. I spied an old rusty chain and must have come off a moped scooter. I picked up a heavy rusty chain and hurled it at the fella. It caught him on the forehead, wrapping round his head, tightening as it went. I heard a massive crunch and looked on in disbelief as his forehead lifted about 1/2 inch as the chain ate into the bone. He screamed and fell off his bike and lay in a heap. Blood spurted everywhere and he rolled around in agony, with the bike twisted around him. I sprinted home in no time at all, as the adrenaline spike was now maximised in me. I ran into the kitchen, nearly taking the front door off its hinges. I ran to the sink to get a drink of water. As I looked up, I saw blood running down the wall. I turned slightly and watched the blood trickle down the window. "Jesus, son, what happened to you?" Ma screamed. "Nothing, Ma. Look at your head." I raised my eyes and saw a fine spray of blood shooting out of my forehead, about 5 feet in the air or so. Ma folded a tea towel and pressed it onto my noggin. "Son, what am I going to do with you?" "I'm going to have to get you a taxi up to the hospital." "The Mater Hospital?" "Ma, it's only 5 minutes up the street. I could run up." "I'm all right, Ma. I don't need a taxi." So off I went, up to the hospital, spraying as many people as I could, while laughing away to myself. I stopped to write my name in blood on a white painted wall, thinking it would look cool. When I eventually got to the hospital, the nurse asked me what was wrong. I lifted the tea towel and the blood hit the ceiling tiles. I don't remember anything after that except the floor hitting me on the face as I did an indie nosebone dive onto it. I didn't wake up until the next morning in a hospital bed and with a terrible headache. The nurse came over to me. "Well, aren't you the lucky one?" "Lucky," I said. "I feel as if I was through a mangle." "Here, stick this in your mouth," she said. The nurse put a thermometer into my mouth and then took my blood pressure. She removed the thermometer, looked at it again, gave it a shake and put it in her pocket. "You're fine," she said and smiled. I could barely open my eyes as the light streaming in the windows was blinding. "What the hell happened?" I asked. "Well, you lost a tremendous amount of blood. Your pulse was so weak we could barely find it. Your heart almost went into a rhythmic shock as it was working so hard. We had to give you almost 4 pints of blood. You're a very lucky boy. What happened to you?" "All I can remember is I was up at the park feeding the ducks and then I woke up here." "How old are you?" she asked. "Are you still at school?" "Still at school? It must be the Earl of Ugly I use." She gave me a big smile and pinched my cheek. "How old are you?" she asked again. "Well, I'll be 11 in a few months." She looked at me in disbelief. I put it in to save her from embarrassment. "I'll nearly 11, but as I said, it's the Earl of Ugly." The two of us laughed. I couldn't tell the nurse what really happened, as she would have had to phone the peelers. "Well, you won't be going anywhere for a few days, and your ma's on her way up. She was on the phone all night." "Well, that's me away. I'm on the night shift. I'll see you later on." I thanked her very much and gave her the thumbs up. I had just closed my eyes when I heard my ma's voice. "Where is that big fucking idiot?" She shouted and came flying in the doors as if she was going to rob a place. "What did I tell you? What the fuck did I tell you?" she scolded me. Your head, you have to take care of your head. Back when you had that accident, the doctor said you was going to have a hairline fracture and you're going to have to be careful. Ma, I was just standing there and this fella cracked me on the head. The tears were rolling down Ma's wee rosy cheeks and she whispered, "I honestly thought I'd lost you again, son," and she started squeezing me. Ma, get off me, everybody's looking over." But she had me in one of her strangleholds trying to kiss me on the dome. "I'm going to be here for a few more days for observation," I said. "Well, I can't get up tonight as I'm working in the films, but your granny and your Aunt Jean can." Ma said, God only knows who else is going to stick her head in." "Ma, just go home. I'm fine. Breakfast will be here soon, and my head's splitting. I'll go on then, son. Try and have a wee doze." "Okay, Ma," I said. The next few days couldn't pass quick enough as my arse was making buttons. I was bored shitless and thought about just getting up and walking home, but decided to bite the bullet and wait. Eventually, Ma and Dad came up to collect me and brought me up fresh clothes. And as I got dressed, behind the curtain, I could hear the doctor say, "Keep an eye on the wound in case of infection, as there are several small holes and an artery was nicked." We gave him a tetanus jab. We thanked the doctor and went off. So my childhood was, I grew up in Belfast in the shadow of death. Hellfire's all around me here, sucking my breath. I look in my head and what do I see? A psychopath, a sociopath and me make three. We laugh at that moment in the moment in time, 'cause rules doesn't matter here, living the crime. The hate for the 5-0, the filth and the swine. Dopamine's distortion of the maladies fine. I'm foaming at the mouth like a rabid dog. A pat up on my one hand getting ready to lob. It takes into the sky and it's leaving the trail. A wave of destruction at the final nail. Anger, rage and suffering, eating our lives. We grew up fast with nothing, sharpening knives. By the time that I was 10, I had a gun up to my head, told the British Army just to shoot me dead. I raised my arms up to God in a venomous scream. Can somebody fucking wake me from my post-traumatic dream? Thank you.
Our first story with a rap at the end. Thanks so much, Liam. What a powerful tale. And Liam was in touch to say it was his first 10x9 and that he had caught the bug and would be back with more. Looking forward to it. We're always looking for new storytellers at 10x9, so if you've got a story you'd like to tell, just like Liam, then get in touch at 10by9.com. I'll be more than happy to help out. Remember, All our storytellers were first-timers at some point. Okay, on to our next story, and first, a bit of context in case you're not familiar. Crossmaglen is a town on the border with the Republic of Ireland, which was heavily fortified and militarised during the Troubles, and had a notorious IRA sniper. With that background information, here's our second storyteller, Ciaran McAlinden.
The saying trouble comes in threes has its origins in a superstition from the Great War. The belief was if soldiers lit a cigarette from the same match, that the man who was the third on the match would be killed in action. I didn't even smoke, much less give other people lights, but on this particular day, I nearly was that soldier. It all started when I pressed the intercom button of Crossmaglen RUC station and waited, contemplating the catastrophe that had been my day so far. Firstly, I'd been diverted down small country roads because of security force activity. Then, Crossmaglen's own version of Max von Strappen, driving a white van, who knew he had a second job delivering car parts, crashed into the side of my car and rode it off. And then finally, as I drove back into the town, my car had a puncture. And in the middle of changing the tyre, what happened? The skies opened up and I got soaked to the skin. While standing for what seemed like an eternity, a crackled voice eventually answered, "What do you want?" I'm here to report a car accident. Silence. Then, what seemed like ages, the crackled voice asked, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yes, I've been told I have to report it here for insurance purposes by my boss." This time, the pause was much shorter. But instead of hearing a voice or instructions, the intercom cackled with the sound of people laughing. And I could hear the words, "Some idiots outside wanting to report an accident," followed by even more laughter. I had become the entertainment for the day. Once I'd given them all my details, bar the colour of my undercrackers and what I had for breakfast, the large, thick black door opened and the crackling, still laughing voice instructed me to come inside and wait. I was quickly greeted by a smiling RUC officer who ushered me into a side room. We don't get many callers here to report accidents, all the while trying to stifle his urge to laugh before he actually managed to compose himself. "Let's get some details. Take me through what happened." I was in the middle of telling him about the events that led to me being in the station when I heard what sounded like a dull balloon bursting, only much louder. I was stopped mid-sentence and I looked over at the policeman, who looked back at me. And then, to my surprise, he disappeared underneath the table in front of me. So just as I was thinking, what the boom! The first mortar hit the police station. The chairs and I were thrown upwards into the air and then violently downwards, winding me instantly. The room was plunged into a confusion of dusty darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in, but given the dust, the visibility was still poor. But I could just about make out the shape of my policeman scampering out the door and into the corridor. I stumbled after him as best I could, only to realise that I'd lost him in the dusty darkness. It was impossible to see him. Follow me, yelled the policeman, trying to convey calmness. But I could tell, just like me, he was panicked. Try as I might, with all the dust and the darkness, he was invisible, bar his strained voice. "Follow me, you need to follow me now," roared the policeman. "I can't feckin' see you, never mind feckin' follow you." To say I yelled this would be an understatement. However, the sound was equivalent to a teenager's voice, only breaking in reverse, going from a bass to a soprano, which in hindsight, I think Pavarotti would have been quite proud of. I stood motionless, not knowing what to do, when I felt a firm hand grab me by the wrist and yank me forward with a command. "Come on to fuck!" We were moving forward now at its speed, and I could just make out the emergency bulkhead light on the door above. But just as we approached, boom, mortar number 2 hit the barracks. It was just like a scene from an action movie. Instantly, we were both blown back down the corridor and deposited violently against the wall. I thought, this is it, and I tried to hold back the tears. At least I'd have a good excuse for them. I could say, honestly, guys, it's just the dust, it's dust. Meanwhile, my policeman was back up on his feet and pulling me up with him. We retraced our steps back and made it to the door, which he pushed open and threw me through. Now, surreal as all of this was, what I witnessed next made me think I was definitely in a dream. There, in the middle of the base, was an adult version of a kid's mattress fort. Kind of ones you'd have built when you were kids to make huts out of. There must have been at least 20 mattresses kind of arranged into a fort-like shape with an entrance in the middle. I looked at the policeman and I pointed at the fort. I says, "Are you fucking serious?" The policeman ignored my comment, launched himself through the gap head first. As you can tell, I'm not the most athletic of souls, and I kind of floundered my way in through the open space, managing to do an unplanned somersault through the entrance, landing kind of very unceremoniously, arms and legs splayed everywhere. Once inside, I could make out the shapes of about 4 other policemen in the fort. Addressing no one in particular, I asked, "Will this really save us?" From the dark recesses came a voice, "No." The emphasis on the word said it all, and as if on cue, boom, the third mortar hit the base. Everything and everyone became airborne, only for us all to collapse in a heap, our fort destroyed, the mattresses scattered everywhere, and then silence. Special effects. A phone started to ring, but no one moved or spoke a word. Everyone just lay where they had fallen and waited to see what would happen next. My ears were now also ringing in a manner that I'd never experienced it. The closest I could come to it was at an AC/DC concert in the Ulster Hall. I stuck my head in the PA bin just as Angus was doing a solo, only what I was experiencing now was much, much worse. Whoever the caller on the phone was, they were not for giving up easily. The phone rang constantly, but no one moved for fear of the next mortar. One of the policemen said it could be another 20, maybe 30 minutes, as this is what the terrorists did in order to catch the police out. He said we all needed to stay put until we had clearance. All the while, the phone rang continuously, and I thought to myself, of course, stay put, sure, are we not having the time of our lives here playing mattress forts? In the end, I have no idea how long we stayed on that floor for in silence, but eventually someone decided we could get up and start moving around. The ringing phone was eventually answered, and the call was from one of the locals ringing the police station to let them know that there'd been a mortar attack. Did they know? And who was going to pay for their broken windows? While checking in with headquarters, I could hear the officers telling their superiors that there had been a civilian in the base, me, who was suffering from shock but had not been injured. As ever, in any crisis, a cup of tea is the first thing offered to the affected. I gladly accepted, if only to wash the dusty taste out of my mouth. And then, with an impish grin on his face, one of the officers asked me, "Do you fancy something a wee bit stronger? A wee toot, maybe?" I was in shock. I totally forgot my car was outside and that I was surrounded by policemen who would now witness my drink driving. A toot sounds good. From nowhere, a slab of Tennant's lager suddenly appeared, and everyone eagerly grabbed the can, and for a brief moment, the room sounded like it was inhabited by snakes instead of security force personnel. When the policeman handed me my can of beer, I said to him, "See you next time headquarters rings," and asked how the civilian is. "I want you to tell them I'm in severe shock now and that my condition has worsened." The policeman looked at me. What's going on? Why? So I told him, "Guinness pays me to persuade the people of this town not to drink that shite. If word ever got out that I had supped from the opposition's cup and finished in this town, they thought I was joking until I handed the can back and said, 'Just the tea will be nice, thank you.' For over 3 hours, we had to wait until we were given the all clear. At one point, the army base commander came in to see us. He asked me where I lived, and I told him Belfast. I don't do accents either. That's where we're taking the injured. We're flying them down to our field hospital in Belfast. There's room in a helicopter if you want to ride. I asked him, has the IRA ever managed to shoot down any helicopters in South Armagh yet? He seemed shocked, even insulted by the very question, and with some pride and assurance proclaimed, "Not a hope in hell. That will never happen." Well, with my luck today, put me in that helicopter, and as sure as the Pope is a Catholic, this will be the day to succeed. So, thanks, but no thanks. I'll take me chances driving. Eventually, we made our way out to the exit. An officer explained, given the risks, that they'd be moving quickly and that I should just go straight to my car and home. As they all donned their Cavalier vests and protective gear, I just kind of looked at them and I said, what about me? And one of the policemen said, you're a civilian, son. You'll go out the way you come in. I thought, oh, right. So he says, but if it makes you feel better, you can go third. So I sat and thought about that. I thought, that's not a bad idea. Acceptable losses. If something happened outside, the first two policemen would get the first and I'd be safe. Happy days. So when it came my turn, I bolted out to my car and drove out of town. Unfortunately, no one had bothered to tell the mobile army units that I would be leaving. As I drove out, I was stopped by an army patrol. There was at least 6 soldiers, all pointing their guns at the car and shouting at me to get out. I stepped out and was promptly thrown to the ground with the soldiers roaring at me. As I lay there, face pressed into the tarmac, I slurred the words, "Ring a fucking face. I'm the civilian who was in it when it was murdered." Eventually, I was cleared to go, and I even received an apology for the misunderstanding. I made my way home. Now, you think all of that was bad enough, but there's one wee bit more that I found out later. Years after the murder attack, I was in work. One of my colleagues told me that she'd been reading about me in a book about South Armagh. She said it was about the mortar bomb attack in Crossmaglen. The plan for the day, it seems, had been to mortar the police station 3 times. Then wait until the all clear had been given, ironically, just over 3 hours later, and then shoot a policeman as he left the police station. The infamous one-shot Paddy had been instructed to take out one of the policemen as they left the station. The agreement was he would shoot the 3rd person to exit. Yeah, just my luck. Luckily for me, they realised the 3rd man was actually a civilian and they aborted the mission. Looking back now, I've often wondered about that day. Was that God's way of telling me not to smoke? Thank you.
What a great story, Ciaran. Told brilliantly. Thank you. And Ciaran actually showed us all a cutting reporting the attack from a local newspaper. Amazing. I know I do this on every podcast, but I think it's really important to say thank you to all the people who helped keep 10 by 9 going with donations either through Patreon or at the live events. It's really important that 10 by 9 remains free of charge, and while we keep our overheads low, we do have some costs such as the website and recording devices, etc. So, thank you. Okay, here's our 3rd and final story on this podcast, and it's an incredibly moving one. It was her first time at a black box event. Grab your hankies. Here's Deirdre Morrison.
My story has a bit of a high pollen count for me, and sometimes my eyes stream, so apologies in advance. I met a man once who'd spent 60 years in prison. The prison had no doors, no bars, no guards, no keys, no locks, no rules. He wasn't a criminal or a political prisoner. He wasn't a refugee or an asylum seeker. He was an emotional prisoner. And the prison he was in was called Watford. When I met him, he was 85, on his deathbed, lung cancer. What I found on that day was a piece of a puzzle, a piece that had been missing from my life since before I was born. He was my grandfather, and that was the one and only time I ever met him. How it happened was this. In 1948, unemployment was rife in Ireland, and the aftermath of World War II was being felt everywhere. My grandfather left his wife and 2 very young sons to go to England so that he could earn enough money to support them. My dad was so young that he was still the one on the way. My grandfather, like so many other economic migrants, worked hard and did the best he could for those he'd left behind. For 2 years or more, he'd sent back money and letters every week to keep in touch, to make sure they had enough. Staying in touch took effort back then. Post took time. Phones were a rarity. But he did it. He worked hard, did everything that could have been expected of him, and probably a lot more. He got a good job, he found a house, and he wrote to my gran and said, "I've got everything ready. Now's the time. Come over. We'll make a life here." Unfortunately, my grandmother, who was barely 20, had parents and a brother who didn't want her to leave, and they certainly didn't want her to take those 2 young children to England. London was probably some kind of pit of hell in their minds. Full of opportunity as it was also a place that could chew up Irish people and spit them out. My grand's father and brother went to England and told my grandfather that under no circumstances was my gran taking those boys to England. He was devastated and betrayed. Everything he'd done had been to get to this stage. And like that, all his hard work, his homesickness, all of it was worth nothing. He wrote to my gran saying, "I understand that you don't want anything more to do with me. That's the way it'll be, so you'll never hear from me again." She didn't. Time passed, about 60 years in fact, and this mystery, this corner piece of the puzzle that was so central to my childhood, despite its absence, that was never talked about and never referred to. I mean, I overheard snippets of conversations between my gran and her friends, but nothing was ever said directly about it. I asked once or twice where he was when I was maybe 6 or 7, and was told he works in England. And that was it. That was the end of the line on that conversation. Of course, it's only looking back now that I see how painful those innocent questions might have been. My dad, of course, didn't speak about him either because he didn't know him. He wasn't born before the man left. And I'm sure this story, this kind of situation, is repeated in families up and down the country, all around the world. Things are repressed. They're not spoken about. The shame, the pain, the brokenness, it's all just kept down below. It's too hard to face, too difficult to be vulnerable enough to look at it. Anyway, a letter arrived one day from a nursing home in Watford saying that my grandfather was there and they didn't know how much longer they'd be caring for him. My dad took this to mean that they wanted him to pay for this man's nursing. Can you imagine? This man that he'd never met, who'd abandoned him, created all this emotional pain, never played any part in his life, and now he was supposed to pay to look after him? He was furious, raging, ranting, didn't want anything to do with him, wanted to kill him, wanted to release his emotion the only way that didn't feel powerless. But I saw my chance. I didn't say anything. I just booked the next available flight to Luton and headed straight to Watford. There was no way I was passing up the chance to meet the missing piece. When I got there, I found an older version of my dad lying on that bed. His sense of humour, his turn of phrase, his love of wine gums, his generosity, so many things, his facial expressions. It was an incredible encounter. And even though my dad would have forbidden it outright if he'd known, I would never have regretted anything more than not going. So we chatted about this and that. I told him about his great-grandchildren. He told me that he'd worked on the Muppet Show. He asked about my dad. He really wanted to know about my dad. He seemed confused about my gran, though, but I later realised that he'd always called her Annie, and I was talking about a woman I'd known as Nancy. He asked me if I thought he'd ever go home, and for clarity I checked if he meant his life there in Watford or if he meant back to Ireland. He looked at me as though I'd grown another head, and he said, "Kilfinnan, where he came from all those years ago, that was home." That was still home. After 60 years of self-imposed exile, that was all he wanted to do. Go home. Unfortunately, that was not to be. I don't think he ever left that bed or that big room. I asked him if he'd like my dad to come and meet him, and in typical fashion that anyone who has relatives of a certain age will probably recognise, he said, Well, sure, if he wants to come, that's up to him. I won't interfere with him one way or the other. I left it at that. He asked if I'd come again and said not to let money be an obstacle to coming back. As I left, and this must have taken some strength for a man in his condition, he leaned over and said, "Tell him to come." I flew home with tears streaming down my face. I phoned my mum from the airport and I told her what had happened. And that catalysed a kind of miracle. My dad went to see him a few days later, and they had some form of reconciliation there in that room. And my dad has never spoken a bad word about him since. The man that he had so much rage for, so much resentment for. Forgiveness had happened. My gran is still alive, by the way. She's 95 years old now, and she still regrets her choice. She spent her life alone, and after 7 decades, still blames herself for it all. She went to his funeral, by the way. She just crumpled when she saw him. Her handsome husband replaced by a shell of life, shadow of a man. I asked her a little more about it in the last few years because I know my window is closing to find out the things that happened then. She shouldn't have been so influenced by her parents, she says. She should have gone. But children were trained to do as they were told back then and not to question authority. When I think about all of the things in this story, what strikes me most is that situations have power over us when we're unable or unwilling to face the emotions that they bring. My dad's generation didn't speak about their emotions, at least not the painful ones. They suppressed them, and then they leaked out in other ways. But, like Maya Angelou said, do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better. We know better now. Our understanding of the human brain and how emotions are created and how they impact us is so much better. So it is up to us to do better and to recognize that the doors are always open in emotional prisons. We just have to be brave enough to walk through them.
Oh, Deirdre, the pollen count is high in this room, I can tell you. Thank you so much. When Deirdre first submitted that story, actually, it was to tell in Limavady, and she told it in Limavady, and the first thing I thought was, I loved the story, and how could you not? And I thought, I need to get that on the podcast, but I didn't want to put it on the podcast until I got her to tell it to you here in the Black Box. I hope you think I made the right decision. So, I think they agreed, Deirdre. What a gift to 10 by 9 that story is. Thank you so much. I hope you'll be back with more before too long. And that evening was very special for me too, as my very grown-up children, Luke and Cara, were both there for the first time in a long time. Thanks for all the joy you bring me. And that's it for this podcast. Check out all the upcoming events on our website, 10by9.com. They are updated regularly. And be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and or Instagram. We won't flood your feed with nonsense, just bits of information. Thanks as always to everyone who makes 10 by 9 happen, Leanne McConville, Margaret McClory and the wonderful DJ Chris O'Donoghue. Thanks too to the team at the Black Box, Ireland's best venue by far. And thanks to the 10 by 9 audience, which was so supportive, attentive and warm as always. And of course, thanks to all our storytellers, but the biggest thanks this week goes to Liam Kelly, Ciaran McAlinden and Deirdre Morrison. I'm Paul Doran and I'll be back with another podcast soon. But for now, bye bye.